Mahatma Gandhi, a nation's culture resides in the hearts and in the soul of its people. Namaskar. On behalf of Kanya Gurukul Campus, Dehradun, Gurukul Kangri Vishwavidyalaya, Haridwar, I, Archana Dimri, warmly welcome you all in this international virtual conference on Cultural Heritage Beyond the Boundaries. This virtual conference could see the light of the day because of the sincere efforts of the ancient Indian history, culture and archaeology department of Kanya Gurukul campus, Dehradun, that took the initiative in collaboration with Dr. Janak Singh Socio-Culture Educational Society, Bareilly. This COVID-19 situation has turned the world topsy-turvy. But as they say, that every dark cloud has a silver lining. This pandemic has helped in giving us a positive feeling that the boundaries across the world will shrink still further. It has given opportunity to the people all over the world to exchange their views about various issues through online platforms. We are visualizing one word situation where there is no boundary based on nationality, color, caste, race, gender, etc. First of all, I want to humbly invite Professor Renu Shukla to formally welcome our guest and introduce the theme of this virtual conference. But before that, I want to share with my audience that Professor Shukla has a never die spirit. She is always eager to explore new horizons, and this virtual conference is the results of her dedications, devotion, and tireless efforts. Welcome to you, ma'am. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Archana ma'am, for your kind words. A very good morning to you all. It's my pleasure to extend a cheerful welcome to all the distinguished guests, scholars, faculty members, participants, and students on behalf of the Department of Ancient Indian History, Culture and Archaeology, Kanya Gurukul Campus, Dehradun of Gurukul Kangri Vishwavidyalaya, and Dr. Janak Singh Socio-Cultural Educational Society, Bareilly. I wish to express my profound gratitude to Honorable Chancellor Sir Dr. Satyapal Singh ji, although he could not join us due to some inevitable reasons, but I thank him for his support and seek his blessings for the event. I extend my heartfelt welcome to Honorable Vice Chancellor of the Vishwavidyalaya, Professor Roop Kishore Shastri ji, for being with us. Despite his busy schedule, he has been kind enough to accept our invitation to grace the occasion. I am grateful to you, sir, for your support and motivation in organizing this conference and making it possible. Thank you, sir, and welcome. I welcome you. I'm extremely delighted to welcome respected Professor Dinesh Bhatt, the Registrar of the Vishwavidyalaya, a well-known scientist and an ardent promoter of biodiversity. Along with his excellent academic achievements, he is known for his sparrow conservation campaign. I'm glad to have him with us today. I welcome you, sir. I feel immensely honored to welcome the pioneer scholar of the Greco-Indian studies, an eminent historian, activist, columnist, my teacher, mentor, and guide, Professor Uday Prakash Arora ji. He is the motivating force behind all his students. We are blessed to have you, sir, with us and welcome you for the conference. I am honored to welcome renowned archaeologist and one of the finest minds of our time, guest of honor for today's event, Dr. B.R. Mani, who has led various reputed national institutes of India and did amazing work in the field of archaeology. I am thankful to you, sir, and welcome you on behalf of my institution. I heartily welcome the keynote speaker of the session, an eminent scholar and archaeologist, a very good human being and friend, Professor Anura Manetunga from the University of Kelaniya, Sri Lanka. I express my gratitude to you, sir, for accepting our invitation to be a part of the conference. I welcome all the guests, scholars from various parts of India and across the world, my colleagues, all participants and students. I am thankful to you all for joining us today and being a part of the conference. Now I'm going to give a small note about the theme of this 2 days international virtual conference on cultural heritage beyond the boundaries. We are what we are today because of the developments that our ancestors made. And similarly, the future generations will also be affected by the decisions and actions that we take today. This is why human culture is so complex. It is cumulative as people build on the inventions of past generations. Heritage is our legacy from the past, what we live with today, and what we pass on to future generations. Our cultural and natural heritage are both irreplaceable sources of life and inspiration. The infrastructure and economic developmental phase that the world is in, however, has somehow shifted the focus of its citizens more towards their financial growth. The new work culture has disconnected us with social, cultural, and philosophical living, while the arts and media is still an integral part of our lives. But the presence is seen as that of a distraction from a past-paced life rather than as an acknowledgement and appreciation of the culture that we are part of and the legacy they are rooted in. We are often, what we often disregard that our cultural heritage is full of wisdom. Ancient texts and scriptures all across the world have talked about the way of living, our connection with the world at large as a human, the scientific progression of self and environment that affects us. And not just the philosophical aspect, but tangible arts are also full of knowledge that is still relevant today and might still be in the future as well. If we allow ourselves to look beyond the geographies, racial and religious differences, we find wisdom in arts, culture, and traditions that are easily applicable in our lives and can be used for a better way of living. Is not kintsugi a beautiful metaphor to embrace flaws and imperfections to create a more beautiful piece of art that we can apply in our lives to rise from a fall? This learning becomes possible only once we remove the lens of boundaries that separate us and focus on what unites us as one part of mankind. And this is one of the reasons why we need to preserve our cultural heritage. In India, we are the repository of an astounding wealth of living patterns and modes of heritage with more than 19,500 dialects, 22 officially recognized languages, several religions, various styles of art, architecture, literature, music, and dance, several lifestyle patterns. India represents a seamless picture of diversity and unity, perhaps unparalleled anywhere in the world. Through a history of changing settlements and political power, India's living cultural heritage was shaped by centuries of adaptation, recreation, and coexistence. The variety of ideas, faiths, practices, beliefs, and value shared by the communities, along with linguistic, ethnic variety, connects one and all. Here, the state of Uttarakhand, there exists a rich cultural heritage preserved through its art and craft, but they are relatively unknown. The presence of many communities and tribes has made the region rich in cultural heritage, which is revered by many. With the efforts of many people, both who are native to the region or are the champions of preserving cultural heritage, the arts and crafts are making a mark beyond the state. The ritualistic folk art of Kumaon Apan was taken through the efforts of a fashion designer to Paris Fashion Week. The sustainable textile fabric nettle is now being adapted into contemporary clothing. The Tumtur copperware is finding its way into every household. However, the roots of these craft forms that lie in the villages of Uttarakhand are weakening due to the biggest problem that the state is currently facing, migration. The infamous push factors are those that make people want to leave the place where they are living. In India, rural areas are poorer than urban areas. Lack of good infrastructure, education, health centers, and jobs are typically the most important push factors. What is important to note is that many young people are also pushed by a lack of cultural and social opportunities. Cities provide more opportunities to get out and meet other like-minded people, indulge in hobbies, and grow unique interests. Isolated rural infrastructure fails to facilitate learning through entertainment, arts, and culture. As citizens of this diverse and delightful country, the most important question we must try to answer is whether we can build communities that look within, despite the harsh conditions that they live in, and find their strengths to build a better attitude, and whether we can help our countrymen living in villages appreciate their own lives in a manner that they are proud to share and pass on their wisdom, thereby leaving a legacy of learnings behind for their children. As more and more people are leaving their villages, the craft holders are getting lesser in numbers. The art craft forms do neither offer economic security that people need, nor does it garner recognition and support that is required by our artisans. The oral traditions and languages are diminishing and are nearly on the verge of extinction. It is thus imperative that we all come together to save these and provide support to the people who are working towards preserving the dying cultural heritage. Another imperative impact area should be the introduction of creative and performance-oriented tools in a cultural context, offering a means to successfully communicate complex thoughts, emotions, and ideas by enabling children and young adults to engage in their own creative processes, work with others, and own their stories. There's evidence that learning through and about the arts can contribute to the development of both intellectual and social skills. Working together fosters community development by bringing about change in mindsets and acts as a medium for understanding social issues. We are the inheritors of our heritage, and it is our duty to pass on this heritage to our future generations. With the growing conflicts in the various parts of the world, it has become imperative to look at cultural heritage beyond these boundaries and look into the necessary efforts and carve out newer ways to protect it. It should be our collective responsibility as part of humankind to preserve the ancient wisdom and support the people who are working towards its development. Culture, tradition, beliefs, and environment are dynamic phenomena that are interwoven tightly in the web of life. Cultural heritage not only gives us a sense of belonging by connecting us to past generations, but also serves as a guiding light to follow the correct path. As it is said, पढ़ते हैं पाँव ठीक जो तारीख राह में, पढ़ते हैं पाँव ठीक जो तारीख राह में, ए चश्म ये रोशनी किसी नक्शपा की है. Therefore, I think it is our duty to pass it on to the future generations, as by doing so, we will be heading towards a world which is more beautiful, more compassionate, more human. I'm sure that the distinguished scholars we have today with us will add new dimensions to the theme and enrich us with their scholarly discourse. I would like to end up by wishing you and your family best of health and safety in these difficult times, and pray Sarve Bhavantu Sukhina, Sarve Santu Niramya. Once again, I welcome you all. Hope you will all have an enriching experience. Thank you so much. Now it's over to Ashna Dimri ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Now I would like to invite Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Roop Kishore Shastri, to grace us with his enlightening thought. Saying anything about Sir personality is beyond my capacity. The only thing I want to share about Sir is that Sir is a true conductor of Indian culture and tradition knowledge. He is a proverbial son in the academic world, and the Mother Earth produce such gems quite rarely. Welcome you, Sir.
Honorable Chief Guest of Chief Patron, Honorable Chief Patron Uday Prakash Arora ji, Professor Anura Mantunga ji, Director, Center for Heritage Studies, University of Kelaniya, Sri Lanka, former Director General and Vice Chancellor, Institute of History of Art Conservation and Museology, New Delhi, Professor B.R. Maniji, Professor Newpur ji, Professor Hemlata ji, Professor Dilip Kushwaha, Dr. Archana Dhimri, Dr. Professor Renu Shukla ji, or our Registrar Sahab, Professor Dinesh Chandra Bhatt ji, and all dignitaries and participants who are joined on this webinar organized by Gurukul Kangri University, Mahila Campus, Dehradun. So all are welcome, and it is my pleasure to join you all on the occasion of inaugural session of International Virtual Conference organized on the theme of cultural heritage beyond the boundaries. First of all, I would like to congratulate the entire team of the Kanya Gurukul campus and Department of Ancient History and Culture and Archaeology, Professor Renu Shuklaji, Professor Nipurji, on this pertinent issue. It is also my pleasure to welcome and thanks to Janak Singh Socio Culture Educational Society for their collaboration and support in successfully organizing this theme. Such initiatives contribute in enriching the academic curriculum and providing research scholars, faculty members, and students coming together, participating and holding extensive discussions on relevant issues of the time. Culture has ever since been a mark of prestige of the Indian society, particularly for its diversity. Cultural heritage, as we understand, is an expression of the ways of the living development by a community and passed on from generation to generation, which includes customs, practices, traditions, places, objects, artistic expressions, and values. Those values which are traditionally we achieved since long time as our rishis, as our ancestors, given that culture and process of the civilization concerning the Vedic and ancient and arts culture, so which includes these customs. Also we live here, entire the country, not even entire country, but entire the world, our culture is spread out by our ancestors and by our rishis and our saints. So it is a manifestation of the value, systems, beliefs, traditions, and lifestyles, thus comprising of the visible and tangible or intangible traces from antiquity to the recent past. Earlier, the concept of cultural heritage was limited to monumental remains of cultures. However, now has been extended to include even the intangible form like voices, values, traditions, oral histories, and so on. In fact, as a matter of fact, the tangible heritage is inextricably linked with the intangible heritage. As Indian culture heritage is a pertinent component of its identity and plays a crucial role in defining the nation and its diversity. अनेकता में एकता. In holds high values. Its preservation holds significance for both socially, economically, religiously, academically, in particular for the minority groups or other minority communities and their generation after. More importantly, it is essential for keeping the integrity of our people. In fact, therefore, efforts must be taken in the right direction in preventing it from gradually deteriorating or dying down. Vital discussions in the various forms like this conference itself play a part in sensitizing people to the cultural heritage and further the necessity of preserving of the same and preserving of the values, preserving of the culture, preserving of the customs, preserving the parampara. So I hope the valuable discussions of the eminent scholars and paper and research paper presentation presenters will enlighten us with some noble aspects of cultural heritage and contribute in enriching such learning spaces. I wish everyone a good luck and well wishes for this today's virtual international conference. And Dr. Renu Shuklai and Dr. Nipuri, I appreciate for your sincere efforts regarding this or for organizing this international virtual conference. I can say this is a marvelous conference, international, this webinar on this topic. This topic you have selected, and I also appreciate this topic and very relevant today, this topic. So please convey my well wishes and blessings to your dedicated team, and thanks all participants, and thanks all our dignitaries and our guests, and thanks also organizers and the entire team of Kanya Gurukul Parisar, Kanya Gurukul Campus, Dehradun. So thank you very much. Over to Dr. Renu ji.
Thank you very much, sir, for enriching us with such valuable words. Now I'm requesting Chief Patron of Janak Singh Socio-Culture Educational Society, Bareilly, Professor Uday Prakash Arora, to give his blessings to us. Sir has done unprecedented work on Indian and Greek language, history, culture, and mythology. for which the Greek government has conferred on him the second highest civilian award of Greece, the Golden Cross Order of Honor. Sir, I request you to say a few words. Over to you, sir.
ये बड़ी प्रसन्नता की बात है कि आज हम अपनी संस्कृति के एक विश्व संदर्भ में बातचीत कर रहे हैं। जब प्रारंभिक यूरोपियन यहाँ पर आए, उन्होंने देखा यहाँ एक ऐसी भाषा है जो हमारे यहाँ से बहुत मिलती जुलती है। उन्होंने देखा संस्कृत भाषा, जहाँ देउस शब्द है और जिसको हम अपने ग्रीक में देउस पितर कहते हैं। उन्होंने संस्कृत भाषा में जियस देवता का नाम पढ़ा, जिसको ग्रीक में जेस पात्र कहा। उन्होंने लैटिन में जुपिटर नाम पढ़ा, नॉर्स में तिर, संस्कृत इसमें इसी प्रकार से देव, ग्रीक में थियोस जो है वो संस्कृत में देव, लैटिन में देयुस, लिथुआनियन में देवस, आयरिश में दिया, लैटिस में ड्यूस, कार्निश में डू। तो देवता पितर मातिर के इस तरीके से तमाम मिलते जुलते जब उन्होंने नाम पढ़े, उन्होंने कहा ये जरूर कोई बात है कि ये एक किस्म के लोग हों। ये एक किस्म के लोग कौन हैं, इसके बारे में उन्होंने मंथन करना शुरू किया। और इंडो यूरोपियन का सिद्धांत कंपैरेटिव फिलोलॉजी जगत में लागू किया गया है कि ये पहले कोई एक लोग थे, एक स्थान पर रहते थे, वहां से अलग अलग स्थानों पर चले गए, तो उनकी ये भाषा की समानता रही, महाकाव्यों में रही और तमाम चीजों में रही, और जिसकी वजह से समानता है। उस एक स्थान पर कहाँ रहे, इस पर विचार विवाद होता रहा और वो अब तक चल रहा है। उस समय कहा गया कि वो दक्षिणी रूस में रहते हैं, पश्चिमी एशिया में रहते हैं। आज कहा जा रहा है नहीं, वो एक स्थान पे नहीं थे। तो ये जो यहाँ से शुरू होता है हमारी इंडोलॉजी की स्टडी। इंडोलॉजी की स्टडी शुरू होती है कि डिस्कवरी ऑफ संस्कृत लर्निंग बाय द अर्ली यूरोपियन स्कॉलर। फिर पता चला पाणिनि की ग्रामर के बारे में कि ये एक जो व्याकरण है, जैसा विश्व में वैसा कहीं दूसरा व्याकरण नहीं। दो व्याकरण की पुस्तक थी, एक पाणिनि की, एक दूसरी व्याकरण की पुस्तक आई चंद्राचार्य ने लिखी। चंद्राचार्य कश्मीर के थे। दोस्तों जानिए, कश्मीर संस्कृत का सबसे बड़ा केंद्र रहा है हिंदुस्तान का, और उस समय संस्कृत में पाणिनि शायद कश्मीर में हुए या अफगानिस्तान में हुए, पतंजलि कश्मीर में, चरक कश्मीर में, पहला इतिहास ग्रंथ कल्हड़ कश्मीर में लगे, बिल्लड़, फिर आपके एस्थेटिक्स में अभिनव गुप्त, क्षेमेंद्र, आनंद वर्धन, वामनाचार्य। तो ये तमाम जो संस्कृत के विद्वान थे, पंडित थे, सब कश्मीर में जले। और कश्मीर हिंदुस्तान का मुख्य केंद्र रहा है संस्कृत भाषा की लर्निंग का। और ये अकेले संस्कृत के बारे में कहा जाता है कि वो संभ्रांत लोगों की भाषा थी, रिफाइंड लोगों की भाषा थी, रिच लोगों की भाषा थी। कश्मीर हिंदुस्तान का अकेला ऐसा था जहां संस्कृत जन भाषा थी। तो ये एक बड़ी महत्वपूर्ण बात है। फिर केवल संस्कृत, तो संस्कृत लर्निंग जो हिंदुस्तान से बाहर गई, कश्मीर से गई, वो तिब्बत में गई, नेपाल में गई, चाइना में गई, तो कश्मीर के प्रचारकों का उसमें बहुत बड़ा योगदान रहा है। तो इसके अलावा कश्मीर में केवल और भी नए नए सेक्ट, कश्मीर का शैविज्म, शैव धर्म, इसके अलावा ऋषि, एक ऋषि श्रृंखला वहां पर आई, एक ऋषि सेक्ट जिसके अंदर मुस्लिम हिंदू सब मिले जुले थे। और करीब 13वीं से 15वीं 16वीं शताब्दी में केवल 13-14 संस्कृत के विद्वान कश्मीर में जितना उन्होंने काम किया है, उतना आधा संस्कृत लिटरेचर ने नहीं किया है। और ये करने वाले जो थे वो कौन थे? जो हमारे आज कश्मीरी पंडित जो अपने ही क्षेत्र में एक रिफ्यूजी बने हुए हैं, ये उन्हीं के पूर्वज थे जिन्होंने की संस्कृत के ज्ञान को सारे भारत के बाहर लाया। तो हमारी सबसे बड़ी हेरिटेज जो है आज संस्कृत लैंग्वेज, जो विश्व के विभिन्न कोनों में गई। काशी और इन सब का तो दक्षिण का तो नाम सुनते रहे, लेकिन कश्मीर का जो योगदान रहा हम उसका कम जिक्र करते रहे, जो कि सबसे बड़ा क्षेत्र संस्कृत के प्रचार का रहा। फिर हमारी जो संयोजिका हैं, उन्होंने इन हेरिटेज की बात की, तो टेंजिबल और इनटेंजिबल। अब ये तो मिल रहा है, ये टेंजिबल है कि क्या है जो हमारा पुराना कश्मीर का साहित्य मिल रहा है। अब टेंजिबल की बात करेंगे तो हमारे स्मारक हैं, हमारे बड़े बड़े यहाँ पर पुरातत्ववेत्ता बैठे हुए हैं, वो भी बोलेंगे स्मारकों के बारे में, आर्कियोलॉजी के बारे में। जब देश में जब तमाम जगहों में उत्खनन हो रहा है, हमने तो ये पढ़ा है कि स्मारकों की स्थिति बड़ी गड़बड़ है और वो विलुप्त होते जा रहे हैं। कोई कमेटी बनी थी आज से 15-20 साल पहले कि हिंदुस्तान में जो तमाम स्मारकों हैं उनकी लिस्ट बनाई जाए, और कुछ स्मारक जो खराब हो गए हैं वो कहाँ गए, कुछ स्मारकों का पता नहीं चल रही है। फिर कुछ वर्षों बाद उस कमेटी के रिपोर्ट को देखा गया, फिर से उन स्मारकों का निरीक्षण किया गया, और अंततः 30 स्मारक है ही नहीं। लाल किले का वो जो है एक गुंबद ही गायब है। इस तरह की तमाम चीजें हम लोग को पढ़ती मिलती रही। तो हमारे जो जो पुरातत्व ऑफिसर हैं, बड़े बड़े अधिकारी, हम चाहेंगे कि जो इस पर प्रकाश डालेंगे आखिर क्या बात है, जो भारतवर्ष के जो पुरातत्व संपदा जो कि दुनिया के तमाम देशों से बढ़ चढ़कर है, और जिसकी वजह से हमारा टूरिज्म और तमाम चीजें कल्चर वगैरह का जो प्रचार हो रहा है, वो क्या स्थिति हो गई है कि हमारे स्मारक जो है आज उनके बारे में इतना कहा जाता है, अखबारों में इतना निकलता है कि हमारी। मैं अशोक के अभिलेखों की बात करूंगा। यहाँ अब दिल्ली में भी अशोक के अभिलेख उत्कीर्ण हैं। इन अभिलेखों में मिलता है अशोक के धर्म के प्रचार के बारे में, कि जो है जो अपने धर्म की प्रशंसा दूसरे की निंदा करता है वो अपने धर्म की हानि करता है। इसमें आपका रिलीजियस टॉलरेशन, दूसरे धर्मों के प्रति प्रेम, ऐसी भावनाएं हैं। तो ये जो इंस्क्रिप्शन अशोक की हैं, क्यों नहीं जगह जगह खोदे ही हमें यहाँ दिखाई पड़ते, दिल्ली में, तमाम हिंदुस्तान के दूसरे शहरों में, और उनका अनुवाद भारत की तमाम जन समुदायों को एक में लाने के लिए। जो हमारे ओरिजिनल हैं वो अभिलेख, मैं कुछ स्थान में गया, वहां कूड़ा पड़ा है, बाहर कोई कुत्ता है, कुछ है, लोगों को पता भी नहीं कि यहाँ पर अशोक का कोई इस तरह का अभिलेख है। तो ये सब चीजें जो हैं हमारे, अब हम समझते हैं कि पहले ज्यादा स्थिति खराब थी, उन चीजों पर विशेष रूप से ध्यान दिया जा रहा है। हम समझते हैं ये जो है इन पर ये ध्यान दिया जाएगा, तो ये जो हमारे टेंजिबल जो ऑब्जेक्ट्स हैं, ये जो संस्कृत भाषा का जो फैलाव हो ही रहा है, और जो हमारी स्थिति थी वो जो है आज उसमें पहले से अच्छी हो रही है। तमाम संस्कृत में हमारा साहित्य है, हमारा विज्ञान है, ज्ञान विज्ञान है, और इसके लिए इसकी भाषा की विस्तार बहुत आवश्यक है। हमारे यहाँ धीरे धीरे जब संस्कृत जब गई और विदेश से तमाम यात्री आने लगे, उन्होंने भारतवर्ष में घूमा और देखा कि यहाँ के लोग जो हैं फिलोसफर्स ज्यादा हैं। और यूरोप में धीरे धीरे ये जो हो गया प्रचार कि इंडिया इज ए कंट्री ऑफ फिलोसफर्स। जब अंग्रेज यहाँ आए थे तो भी उनको ये पहले से, यहाँ आने से पहले सुनाई पड़ा था, और ये उन्होंने ग्रीक अकाउंट्स में, लैटिन अकाउंट्स में उन फिलोसफर्स के बारे में पढ़ा था, सुकरात के बारे में, प्लेटो के बारे में, अरिस्टोटल के बारे में। और सबसे पहले जब सिकंदर जब आया हिंदुस्तान आया, तो उसने वहां जब तक्षशिला में था तो उसने सुना है यहाँ पर तक्षशिला के बाहर कुछ साधु रहते हैं, नग्न साधु, जो कि विभिन्न पोस्चर्स में रहते हैं। ये कौन है, किस प्रकार के हैं? सिकंदर ने अपने एक अधिकारी ओनर सेक्रेटरी को भेजा कि जाओ उनको देख के आओ। वो वहां गया, उसने उन साधुओं को देखा, वो विभिन्न मुद्राओं में थे, नग्न थे बिल्कुल, जिन्हें कहा जाता है जिम्नोसोफिस्ट। उन्हें सेक्रेटरी की वार्ता उन साधुओं से हुई, उन नग्न साधुओं से, और उस पर दर्शन की बात चली, और उसमें 3 अनुवाद करने वाले बीच में। सोचिए, दर्शन जैसी विषय पर चर्चा हो रहा है, और एक भारत का साधु हो, भारत का एक योगी, और एक जनाब ग्रीक का, वो दोनों 3 भाषाओं में अनुवादित करके, पहले ग्रीक से जा रहा है ईरानियन में, ईरानियन से बैक्ट्रियन से, बैक्ट्रियन से लोकल भाषा में, फिर इस पर चर्चा हो रही है। वो लौट के आया, उसने सारी बातें बताई। लौट कर जो सिकंदर के साथ लोग गए थे तमाम, और यहाँ हिंदुस्तान के तमाम और जो विदेशी तमाम लोग थे, जो उन्होंने इस घटना के बारे में जाना, और धीरे धीरे ये घटना इतनी लोकप्रिय हो गई। कैसे लोकप्रिय हो गई? हिंदुस्तान से लेकर के दक्षिणी पूर्व एशिया को छोड़िए, वो आपके इंग्लैंड तक, जहां सिकंदर गया भी नहीं, इस घटना के बारे में, इस घटना के तमाम विवरण मिलने लगे। 70 इसके संस्करण हैं और कम से कम 35-36 भाषाओं में इस घटना के बारे में मिलता है। और इंडिया came to be known as a country of philosopher, it is on account of this घटना। ये जो है इसके प्रचार इतना हुआ कि इंग्लैंड के गांवों में, आपके दक्षिण पूर्व एशिया जहां सिकंदर का कोई मतलब नहीं, सेंट्रल एशिया में तो खूब फैला। और हिंदुस्तान की जो इस घटना के बारे में फिर पता चला, धीरे धीरे प्रचलित होता गया। रोमन पीरियड के अकाउंट्स में कि प्लेटो इंडिया गए थे, फिर आपके पॉसिनियस इंडिया गए थे, अरिस्टोटल ने भी इंडिया से फिलॉसफी की शिक्षा प्राप्त की, लुकियानो से जर्मन एक ये ग्रीक फिलॉसफर होता है, वो लिखता है कि फिलॉसफी ने सबसे पहले अपनी यात्रा प्रारंभ की भारत से। भारत से इजिप्ट गई, इजिप्ट के बाद तमाम दूसरे देशों में फिलॉसफी ने यात्रा की। तो फिलॉसफी के बारे में हिंदुस्तान के लोगों के बारे में बहुत कहा जाने लगा। हमारे अंग्रेज भाइयों ने भी ये कहना शुरू किया कि ये तो फिलॉसफर थे, इसलिए उन्होंने विज्ञान में तरक्की नहीं की और ये इस दुनिया के बजाय ऊपर की बात ज्यादा सोचते थे। तो हम लोगों को भी अच्छा लगने लगा कि हम लोग अपने प्राचीन ज्ञान विज्ञान के बारे में नहीं जानते थे, तो हम लोग को भी अच्छा लगने लगा कि हाँ, हम लोग तो ऊंची बात करते थे, हम दूसरे संसार में थे। ये एक बहकावा शुरू हो गया, जो कि वास्तव में ऐसी बात नहीं थी। हमने विज्ञान के क्षेत्र में काफी कार्य किया था और उसके बारे में आज भी यूरोपियन जानते हैं, विदेशी जानते हैं। विज्ञान के क्षेत्र में जैसे कहा जाता है कि इंडिया इसलिए विज्ञान में नहीं आगे बढ़ा, तो यहाँ पर वो साइंस नहीं डेवलप हुई जिसमें ओरिजिनल एलिमेंट मैटर को माना जाता है। हमने ब्रह्मन आत्मन की चर्चा की, मैटर की चर्चा नहीं की, और इसलिए हमारे यहाँ विज्ञान विकसित नहीं हुआ। तो ये अभी शतपथ ब्राह्मण में ब्रह्मधारणा के उपनिषद में, छांदोग्य उपनिषद में एक कथा मिलती है आरुणि उद्दालक और पांचाल की, जिनको कहा जाता है डिस्कवरर, जिन्होंने कहा कि सृष्टि में ओरिजिनल एलिमेंट वाटर नहीं है। उन्होंने कहा ओरिजिनल एलिमेंट एक सद मैटर है, यानी उन्होंने ईश्वर भगवान ब्रह्मन के नाम पर मैटर की चर्चा की। और कहा जाता है मैटर की चर्चा थेल्स ने की, जो कि आयोनिया का फिलॉसफर था ग्रीक संसार में। थेल्स से पहले ये आपके आरुणि उद्दालक का पांचाल हुए हैं, जिन्होंने सत्य को ओरिजिनल एलिमेंट माना है। सत्य क्या है, इस सत्य की व्याख्या की है उन्होंने शतपथ ब्राह्मण में और दूसरे ग्रंथ में उद्दालक आरुणि पांचाल ने। तो मैटर की सृष्टि का ओरिजिनल एलिमेंट ब्रह्मन आत्मा नहीं, मैटर है, इसकी चर्चा ग्रीक से पहले ये आपके आरुणि उद्दालक और पांचाल ने की थी। अरिथमेटिक, अलजेब्रा, ग्रामर इंडिया से आधुनिक यूरोप ने ग्रहण किया और वहां से भी चीजें गई। अरबों के माध्यम से काफी भारतीय चीजें पहुंची, स्पेन के माध्यम से काफी भारतीय चीजें दुनिया में इधर उधर पहुंची ज्ञान विज्ञान के क्षेत्र में। तो ये जो ज्ञान विज्ञान की बात है, इसमें जो भारत के और जिन ज्ञान विज्ञान के क्षेत्र में हम जितना कार्य किया है हमने, उसको तमाम यूरोपियन स्कॉलर जानते हैं। और आप देखिए भरा हुआ है यूरोपियन स्कॉलर्स के जो तमाम जो स्टेटमेंट इंडिया की स्कॉलरशिप की चर्चा करते हुए हैं। अब ये ठीक है, उस स्कॉलरशिप जो हमने की है, उस समय जितना लोग जानते थे उससे हम कम नहीं तो उससे ज्यादा ही थे, लेकिन इस ज्यादा में होने की हम बहकावे में जो तमाम चीजें असंभव सी हैं, गलत है, उनको हम उसको में ना मिलाएं। सब समझते हैं कि इंडिया जो है, तमाम हमारे यूरोपियन विद्वानों ने भी इसकी चर्चा की, बर्ड्यूरा ने की है, अल्बर्ट आइंस्टीन ने की है, शोपेनहावर ने की है, श्लेगल ने की है, तमाम लोगों ने। अब ये जो हमारा जो भारतवर्ष था, ये जो संस्कृति थी, इस संस्कृति में सर्वोच्च चीज किसको माना गया? एक ये बात सोचने की है कि व्हाट इज द हाईएस्ट। आप किसी धर्म में तो मानते हैं कि ये फला पैगंबर हाईएस्ट है, फला ग्रंथ साहब हाईएस्ट है, ये ग्रंथ सबसे ज्यादा ऊंचा है। हमारे यहाँ क्या किया गया, सबसे ऊंची चीज क्या है? सर्वोच्च स्थान किसको दे? भगवान को दे, ईश्वर को दे, किसको दे? कौन सर्वोच्च है? उससे इस पर तमाम बहस हुई। तमाम हमारे यहाँ बहस का बड़ा एक परंपरा थी। लॉजिक एंड रीजन, न्याय मीमांसा, ये सब बहस पे चलते थे। उपनिषद बहस पे चलते थे, डायलॉग्स चलते थे। आपके आर्य समाज में स्वामी दयानंद ने शास्त्रार्थ पद्धति, अपनी बहस पद्धति चलाई, इसमें लॉजिकल रीजन को महत्व दिया गया। तो ये विचारों का तो सत्य जो तो सर्वोच्च चीज क्या है, हम किसको माने? किसी ने कहा इसको, किसी ने कहा इसको, लेकिन हमारा जो हिंदू संस्कृति कहती है तो सर्वोच्च स्थान किसका है? ट्रुथ इज सर्वोच्च, सर्वोच्च स्थान सत्य का है। सत्य के अतिरिक्त दूसरा बड़ा कोई धर्म नहीं है, और जो अन्य झूठ जो है वो जो है नहीं ठहरता उसके आगे। तो सबसे बड़ा धर्म क्या है? क्रिश्चियनिटी नहीं है, हिंदुइज्म नहीं है, सबसे बड़ा धर्म इस्लाम नहीं है, सबसे बड़ा धर्म है सत्य, सबसे ऊंचा स्थान। सत्य से ऊपर जो है कुछ नहीं है। जैसे, और सत्य ये नहीं है कि हमने ठेका ले लिया सत्य जानने का। हिंदू संस्कृति कहती है कि सत्य सर्वत्र है, सत्य जो है सर्वत्र उसकी प्रतिष्ठा है। आप भी सत्य को जानते हैं, हम भी सत्य को जानते हैं, हम सब सत्य के प्रयास में लगे हुए हैं, कोशिश में लगे हुए हैं। सत्य हमने पा लिया हो ऐसा नहीं है। तो हम कहते हैं कि क्या है यहाँ पर, तो हम कहेंगे हिंदू संस्कृति सत्य नहीं, सत्य के खोजने का प्रयास है। ये नहीं कहते कि हम सत्य हैं। सेमेटिक संस्कृतियां जिसमें इस्लामिक है, आपकी क्रिश्चियनिटी है, जुडाइज्म है, और तमाम जो धर्म है ये बिलीफ से मानती है जो हम कह रहे हैं वही सत्य है, और दूसरा जो है सत्य नहीं है। हम कहते हैं, जो हम कह रहे हैं आपका भी सत्य सत्य हो सकता है, हमारी ये कोशिश है हमारा सत्य, तो हम सत्य को महत्व देते हैं। मध्वाचार्य ने एक पुस्तक लिखी, सर्वदर्शन संग्रह, जिसमें आपके 16 दार्शनिकों, जिसमें आप बताइए इसमें 16 दर्शन है। यानी हमारे यहाँ विविधता इतनी है, मल्टी कल्चरलिज्म इतना है, तमाम धर्मों के लोग यहाँ आकर रहने लगे। एक ही धर्म के अंदर विभिन्न दर्शन हैं, जैसे मध्वाचार्य की पुस्तक है जिसमें 16 दर्शनों की बात लिखी हुई है, एक ही में उसमें है। तो बताइए यहाँ कितनी विचारों का डेमोक्रेसी है, विचारों का लोकतंत्र है हिंदू संस्कृति। यानी जो है ये जो सर्वधर्म संग्रह है, और उसमें सबसे ऊंचा स्थान नास्तिकों का है, चारवाक का है, चारवाक का प्रदेश। तो नास्तिक को भी हिंदू संस्कृति धर्म का अंग माना गया, वो उससे अलग नहीं है, आप और जगह ही मान सकते। नास्तिक जो है ईश्वर को नहीं मानता, लेकिन सत्य को मानता है। हमारे लिए सत्य बड़ी चीज है। हम भी ईश्वर की खोज, सत्य की खोज में लगे हैं, नास्तिक भी सत्य की खोज में लगा हुआ है। वो सत्य की खोज में इतना डूबा हुआ है कि ईश्वर से भी ऊपर चला जाता है, वो आगे सोचेगा कि क्या है। तो सत्य जो है ये हमारे यहाँ जो है, लेकिन सत्य कैसे खोजा जाए, सत्य कैसे खोजा जाए, इसको जो है सत्य ऐसा नहीं, सत्य खोजने के लिए आप तमाम विश्वविद्यालयों में जाइए, ये तमाम अध्ययन कीजिए। सत्य कहीं बाहर नहीं है, सत्य आपके भीतर है, इसका आपका अन्वेषण कीजिए। सत्य आपके भीतर है, बाहर नहीं है, और इसके जानने के लिए किसी गुरु की आवश्यकता नहीं है, वो आप स्वयं आप जो है समर्थ है। तो गांधी ने भी ये कहा, विवेकानंद ने कहा कि सत्य को आप स्वयं जानो, सत्य आपके भीतर है। तो ये जो सत्य को, ये जो विचारों का हुआ, लेकिन सत्य जानने के साधन हमारे शुद्ध होने चाहिए। सत्य ऐसा नहीं हो कि हम, जब तक साधन शुद्ध नहीं होगा तो आप सत्य नहीं जान सकते। आप हिंसात्मक मार्ग से सत्य नहीं जान सकते, सत्य केवल अहिंसात्मक साधनों से जाना जा सकता है। तो सत्य और अहिंसा जुड़े हुए हैं। इन दो शब्दों में हिंदू संस्कृति को कह सकते हैं, सत्य और अहिंसा। हिंदू संस्कृति सत्य को खोजने का नाम है, और सत्य जो है अहिंसात्मक साधनों, हमारा जो सोर्स होना चाहिए, सोर्सेज भी जो है वो अहिंसात्मक होना चाहिए। हम हिंसात्मक साधनों से सत्य की खोज नहीं कर सकते। हिंसात्मक अब तक संसार में हिंसात्मक साधनों से सत्य की खोज की गई है। रूसी में जो क्रांति हुई, कार्ल मार्क्स का कम्युनिज्म हिंसात्मक सिद्धांतों पर आधारित था। फ्रांस की क्रांति जो लिबर्टी, इक्वलिटी, फ्रेटर्निटी के लिए हुई थी, वो हिंसा से हुई। तमाम पब्लिक के लोग मारे गए, सामंत मारे गए, यहाँ आपके रूस में भी मारे गए। तो जो एक समानता लाने के लिए जो क्रांति 19वीं शताब्दी में हुई थी वो उसी शताब्दी में खत्म हो गई। ये क्रांतियां क्यों नहीं, जिस चीजों के लिए की गई थी उस तरह का समाज क्यों नहीं ला पाई? इसलिए ला पाए क्योंकि साधन अशुद्ध थे। उन्होंने हिंसात्मक साधनों का उपयोग किया। तो आगे आप भारत ने जो था, हम अहिंसात्मक साधनों का विचार करते हैं। आधुनिक युग में इसको गांधी ने लाने का प्रयत्न किया। उन्होंने स्वतंत्रता की लड़ाई में अहिंसात्मक साधनों का प्रयोग करने की बात। उन्होंने ये भी कहा कि दुनिया के अंदर जो है, जो आगे जो होगी लड़ाई जो होगी अहिंसात्मक सिद्धांतों से होगी। आजादी के बाद राम मनोहर लोहिया और जयप्रकाश जी ने, इन लोगों ने अहिंसात्मक साधनों की बात की। तमाम जो हम किसी तरह का जो प्रोटेस्ट करें, मार्टिन लूथर ने गांधी से सीखा वहां अमेरिका में। ये एक बहुत बड़ी बात थी। अहिंसात्मक साधनों की बात हमारे देश में ऐसा नहीं कही है, बहुत शुरू से कहते जाते रहे। बुद्ध ने कही, महावीर ने कही, और तमाम लोगों ने अहिंसा की बात कही। अहिंसा की लोगों ने उस पर, अहिंसा की बात चर्चा लोगों ने उस पर भी की, वो जो आपके खान पान शाकाहारी होने पर। लेकिन गांधी ने जो एक वैचारिक बदलाव किया, अब तक अहिंसा शक्ति का प्रयोग जो दुनिया के इतिहास में छोटे परिवर्तनों के लिए किया गया। आपके व्यवहार में परिवर्तन हो जाए, आप अहिंसात्मक हो जाइए, आपके जो है पड़ोसी से आप प्रेम करने लगिए जैसे ईसा करते थे, ये बातें। लेकिन अहिंसात्मक सिद्धांत से समाज, एक राजनीतिक व्यवस्था बदल दी जाए, आर्थिक व्यवस्था बदल दी जाए, नैतिक व्यवस्था बदल दी जाए, ये जो इतने बड़े स्तर पर अहिंसात्मक साधनों से आजादी की लड़ाई लड़ी जाए, मुल्कों में बदल दिया जाए, आर्थिक रूप से, सामाजिक रूप से, राजनीतिक रूप से, अहिंसा केवल एक छोटे स्तर पर ही नहीं रहा, बल्कि एक विश्व व्यवस्था को बदलने में इसका उपयोग किया जा सकता है। ये दिस वाज ए कंट्रीब्यूशन ऑफ गांधी। तो आज जो है, हम जो जिस स्थिति में हैं, हम बदलाव की बात सोचते हैं कि दुनिया में बदलाव की जितनी प्रक्रियाएं हुई हैं उसमें हिंसात्मक शक्ति का प्रयोग किया गया है। घड़ी की सुई का काम आगे बढ़ने का है, पीछे जाने का नहीं। हमने हिंसात्मक शक्तियों का प्रयोग करके देखा और बदलाव लाने की चेष्टा की। उन शक्तियों से, उन क्रांति के सिद्धांतों से नहीं आया। अब आगे हमें सोचना चाहिए कि कौन सी अहिंसात्मक शक्ति है, कौन से अहिंसात्मक विचार हो सकते हैं जो तो बदलाव लाने के लिए कार्य कर सकते हैं। हमारे विश्वविद्यालय में हो सका, अब हम जो नई शताब्दी आ रही है, जो नया समय आ रहा है, हम आशा करते हैं इन विषयों पर शोध होगा, लोग हमारे विचार करेंगे। हमारे जो तमाम यहाँ पर जो डेलीगेट्स आए हैं, इस ढंग से कैसे ये परिवर्तन जो है, जो अब तक जो होता रहा है समाज के अंदर, ये सब जो चीजें होती रही है, इसको कैसे बदला जाए, और इसको जो है अहिंसात्मक शक्ति का उपयोग गांधी ने जो किया है, उसको हम आगे कैसे नहीं बढ़ा सकते। मार्टिन लूथर और दुनिया के तमाम, नेल्सन मंडेला आदि सबों ने अपने देशों में कुछ प्रयोग किया गया है। हिंदुस्तान में क्यों नहीं इसका प्रयोग होता, क्यों नहीं हमारा समाजशास्त्र, हमारे सोशल साइंटिस्ट इस पर कार्य करते हैं। और हम आशा करते हैं कि इस गोष्ठी में जो आए हैं, मैं सबका अभिनंदन करता हूँ कि यहाँ पर आए और जो आकर के हमारी जो संस्कृति, हमारे विरासत की चर्चा कर रही है। हमारे विरासत की चर्चा अशोक ने इस अहिंसा की बात कही, और जहाँ सिकंदर और चंगेज खान और तैमूर जैसे सम्राट दूसरे देश इतिहास में चर्चा की गई, हमारे अशोक था जिसने अहिंसात्मक रूप से एक साम्राज्य को बढ़ाया। ये जो चीजें होती रही हैं, हम समझते कि हमारा ये हमारे जो इतिहास को, जिन्होंने इतिहास में एकता स्थापित की है, शांति और अहिंसा को लेकर बढ़े हैं अशोक, ऐसे सम्राटों के बारे में लोग और चीजें आगे बढ़े। बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद जो आपके
बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद। आपको सुनकर तो हम लोग सच में अभिभूत हो जाते हैं। बहुत बहुत सर धन्यवाद once again for your blessings. You really rightly said that culture play an important role in the development agenda of any nation. It's represent a set of shared attitude, values, goals, and practice culture. Once again, sir, thank you very much for your blessings. We are grateful to our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Arora, Registrar, for taking out time for their busy schedule. Before we move towards our keynote session, I request our Kanya Gurukul campus coordinator, Professor Nipur, to give the vote of thanks to all the dignitaries. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Archana and Renu, for giving me this opportunity. Today, we are organizing a 2-day workshop, international web seminar, that is Culture Heritage Beyond the Boundaries. Very good morning to all who are present in this meeting and all who are part of this international web conference. First of all, I want to thank Professor Roop Kishore Shastri. He is Honorable Vice Chancellor of this university. He is a true conductor, as Archana said. Really, he is a true conductor of Indian culture and social system. He is a good motivator for all of us. And not in the field of education only. Even he motivates us to be a good human being. He motivates us to upliftment of the society, how to work for it, and in his guidance our university is progressing, and now it is internationally known for its education system, its research and values that we inculcate in our students. We are blessed to have him as our Vice Chancellor. Now, again, I thank you, sir, for your kind words and for being with us whenever we require you. Thank you, sir. Now, since as Dr. Shukla informed us, our Honorable Chancellor and Registrar, they are not able to join us due to some reason. Again, but I thank both of you to motivate us to organize such a big conference. Without your support, sir, we will not be in a condition to manage all these things. Now, I thank you, Dr. U.P. Arora, sir. Sir, मैं आपसे पहले मिली हूँ रेणु के साथ और आज आपको दोबारा सुनने का मौका मिला. आपका बहुत बहुत स्वागत और बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद यहाँ पर अपने हमें गाइड करने के लिए. सर, जैसे आपने बताया कि भाई जो संस्कृत है, संस्कृत भाषा का चलन सबसे पहले या सबसे ज्यादा हमने कश्मीर में देखा था. कश्मीर पंडित थे जो सबसे ज्यादा इसको प्रयोग में ला रहे थे. तो इस कार्यशाला से हमें उम्मीद है कि बहुत सारी जानकारी जो इस फील्ड के नहीं हैं उन्हें मिलेगी अपने कल्चर के बारे में. और इस तरह की कार्यशाला का आयोजन एक रेगुलर बेसिस पे होना बहुत जरूरी है, so that our next generation, even for us also, next generation, they come to know how rich we are. जैसे कि डॉक्टर अरोरा ने कहा कि जो विज्ञान है, जो गणित है, वो सबसे पहले हमारे पास थी, लेकिन जाना किसने, बोला किसने इसके बारे में? यूरोपियंस ने. हमें अपनी संस्कृति को सहेजना भी है और बताना भी है. हाँ, हम हैं, ये हमारी धरोहर है. We have to preserve it. Thank you, sir. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Now we will move to our keynote session. I request Professor Hemlata to chair this session. And with her due permission, I request Dr. Priya to introduce the keynote speaker, Professor Anura Manatunga, and invite him for his deliberation. Over to you, Dr. Priya.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much. It gives me pleasure to introduce Professor Anura Manatunga. He is a senior professor in archaeology at the Department of Archaeology and the director of the Center for Heritage Studies, University of Kelaniya, Sri Lanka. He has been working as the teaching faculty at the Department of University of Kelaniya since 1986 and was the head of the Department of Archaeology of the university during 1996 to 2001. He was the consultant and director of the Polonnaruwa World Heritage Site Project under Central Cultural Fund of Sri Lanka from 1999 to 2014. Professor Manatunga is a founder member and fellow of the Sri Lanka Council of Archaeologists. He was an honorary librarian of Royal Asiatic Society of Sri Lanka, Senate member of the Buddhist and Pali University of Sri Lanka, and member of the Board of Governors of the Postgraduate Institute of Archaeology of the University of Kelaniya. He is a member of the Advisory Committee of the Department of Archaeology, Government of Sri Lanka, and is working as a consultant or resource person in various institutions related to heritage in Asia. Professor Manatunga is a founder and general secretary of the International Association for Asian Heritage, which is one of the most famous and promising academic association in the field of heritage studies in the region. Today, he has gathered among us to provide some insight on the theme, patterns of trafficking of antiquities beyond border. Now, I invite respected Professor Anura Manatunga to share his views on the topic. Over to Professor Anura Manatunga, sir, please.
And first of all, I would like to wish you a good noon actually, and it's a noon now. And I would like to thank Dr. Renu Shukla for inviting me to talk on heritage. We want to talk on the patterns of trafficking of antiquities on borders. Selected this topic because this is one of the most important topics on cross-cultural studies. And you know, if we lost antiquities, it's lost forever. It's not replaceable thing. And even though we discovered antiques from somewhere else, those are not valuable as they found in the context. So antiques without context is more or less useless. So therefore, we have to protect antiques in the setting and also protect them in context themselves. Therefore, we have to think about this issue today, and it is one of the biggest issues in the world nowadays. You know about the problems of narcotic, and you have heard about the problems of weaponry and terrorism, also the human traffic. So the trafficking of antiquities is being considered as the fourth dangerous crime of the world when we consider cross-border crimes. And it is also interconnected with narcotic crimes and also human trafficking. Human trafficking also included with prostitute and also weaponry and also terrorism, and all these things are interconnected. Therefore, this crime has been considered as one of the most vulnerable crimes of the world at this moment. So we have to think about how it has happened and how to control it, how to mitigate this problem. First of all, we'll see what are the patterns of this. This antique trafficking has three nodal points. One is the source countries like our South Asia, also East Asia, and African countries and Latin American countries. Those countries and also the Middle East. Those countries has been considered as source countries. And then there are middlemen. Some people like auction houses, people who run auction houses, and so traders, businessmen, brokers, valuers, and those kind of people are there. And then there are the receiving or destination of these antiquities. Those people are in the Western world and also in the rich Asian countries like Japan and Singapore and Hong Kong, and also in New York, London, and also some of the Western cities. So this antiques goes from our countries through some of the nodal points to those destinations. And we have to identify these nodal points and to mitigate this issue. First, we have to think about what are the causes for this crime. This crime is been known as the cultural property crime, CPC. It's well known as CPC. And today there is a branch, the Interpol, to prevent this, and also FBI also has a cultural property unit. FBI, you know about the Federal Investigation Bureau in America. They also have a branch to cope up with this issue. Also in other countries, we have several law enforcement agencies to mitigate this issue. And first of all, we have to think about how to understand what are the causes behind that. The main cause behind the cultural property trafficking is the war and political instability. The countries, they are not much established political situation or in instability political situation or under war. They are the more vulnerable countries. Nowadays, you know what's happened in Iran, and there are at least 90 museums have been looted. And then you must have heard about Cambodia and also in Afghanistan. And these countries are the most vulnerable to this issue. Though we are not facing war, and our countries are also, to some extent, vulnerable in this issue. And the other reason is that less of respect for other cultures. That's also one of the biggest reasons for trafficking of antiques. And the other one is we are greedy for money. So also there, we all are looking for becoming rich in one night. For that, people are tend to join in the kind of groups, and they do that. You know that there are at least 20 groups of people who are dealing with this antique traffic, Anuradhapur itself. So it was discovered by police recently. So there's a big issue in our countries and in India, you know, and Professor must be knowing about it very well. And this has to be addressed seriously. And that's why I selected this week to talk on Beyond Border Heritage Conference. I'm so sorry that we confused due to this technical issue I faced at the beginning. But anyway, now I think you can hear me and will talk, consider my thing. And then we have to think about how this is happening. First, this is happening at the ground level, and mostly very poor people engage in it. I know that the people sell the antiques in London or in France, in Paris, in France. They supposing if they get 100 pounds for one item, £1 is getting by the people who discover them from our countries. So the most of the money goes to the auctioneers and also the middlemen. And the looting and the vandalism is the base of this this trade. That's the basis. Mainly the people, they loot the antiquities from historical sites and monuments and also archaeological sites, and also through clandestine excavations. They collect them and simply then they smuggle them. And so smuggling is not much easy thing. They do that through airport and also through harbors. And according to most reports, I think even Chennai harbor is also one of the vulnerable places for this, and also Mumbai, and in our and also in Colombo, and these places. I mean, we have to keep an eye on those places. And now we have to think about what are the laws already imposed to prevent that. You know about the Hague Convention in 1954. It is for preventing antique trade and demolition of antiques during war period. So that is also there. And also 1956 UNESCO Convention, Delhi Convention, that's also there. And in 1970, there was another convention imposed by UNESCO. That's we call for controlling illicit trade of antiquities and transfer of ownership of antiquities. So those laws are also UNIDROIT Convention of 1995, and those conventions are there. But these conventions are not enough for controlling antique trafficking. What we have to do is we have to impose new laws into our countries for mitigate this issue. And I think Indian law also has been amended, and also Sri Lanka and also some other countries. So we also have to introduce a common law for the whole SAARC area to mitigate this issue. I suppose we have to have a convention or law for SAARC areas to control this. And other thing is we have to educate people, especially target groups, people like police and also people like civil servants and also politicians. And you know, in England, there is a all-part heritage society to address this kind of issues. And in the parliament, they all join. But our countries, they do not join together this kind of work, but we should try. People like Professor Mani, he's a very respectable person and can try to get together all of them and address this issue. Because politicians are more powerful and they can do a lot of things in preventing this. And then the law agencies like police and also the customs. I think we have to send some of the archaeologists and heritage managers as customs. I don't know whether it's happening in India or elsewhere, but I think we have to think about that also to prevent this issue. And the clergy, they also has to be educated on the importance of these areas. Because we have heard that lots of palm leaf manuscripts and other antiquities go to the people's hand through monks, unfortunately, because they don't know the value of those things sometimes, and it's difficult to control in them also. Therefore, we have to educate them also. And then the general public. I think the most important is educating general public. General public means not only the elders but school. So we have to educate school children the importance of protecting antiques and also preventing this kind of trafficking. And then at least we can mitigate this issue. Though we can't control it 100%, we can mitigate it to some extent if we educate school kids about the importance of antiques and this cultural items. So that's the thing I would like to draw your attention. I'm sorry for this technical fault and for confusing at the beginning due to that. And thank you very much for listening to me. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Shukla.
I'm thankful to you, sir. Despite difficulties, you have joined us and delivered your thoughts. Once again, thank you very much, sir, for your wonderful presentation on this relevant issues. It's given a new direction to culture heritage beyond the boundaries. Now, I would like to invite Dr. Himanshu Pandit to kindly introduce our guest of honor, Dr. B.R. Mani, for today's session. Over to you, Dr. Himanshu.
Thank you very much, Dr. Archana. Am I audible to you?
Yes, sir, you are very much audible.
Thank you very much. A very good noon to our honorable guest, Shraddhay VC sir, the respected registrar sir, chief patron, Professor UP Arora sir, Professor Nipur ma'am, Professor Hemlata ma'am, as well as our today's keynote speaker, Dr. Anura Manatunga sir from Sri Lanka, guest of honor, Dr. B.R. Mani sir, and of course, all the intellectual participants of this webinar. I, Himanshu Pandit, warmly welcomes you all in this international virtual conference on cultural heritage beyond the boundaries, organized by the Department of Ancient Indian History, Culture and Archaeology, KGC Dehradun, in the collaboration with Dr. Janak Singh Socio-Culture Educational Society, Bareilly. First of all, I would like to thank Professor Renu Shukla ma'am that she gave me a chance to introduce Dr. Mani, or I should say that she honored me by giving this opportunity. Dr. Buddha Rashmi Mani is a name which has actually no need to be introduced. This name is a whole introduction in itself. Dr. Mani is a renowned archaeologist, a well-known numismatist, and a famous art critic. He has served as the Additional Director General in the ASI, Archaeological Survey of India. He was the Director General of National Museum and VC National Museum Institute, Deemed University, New Delhi. He has worked as the Vice Chairman of the Indian Archaeological Society, New Delhi, and was one of the editors of its prestigious research journals, Puratatva and Pura Prabaha. He has been involved in the conservation of world's famous monuments in Maharashtra, Goa, Delhi, Jammu and Kashmir, etc. Dr. Mani has discovered a large number of archaeological sites. He has directed more than 19 excavation projects in the country, like Lalkot, Salimgarh, Delhi, Muhammadnagar, Harnaul, Haryana, Siswania, Sankisa, UP, Kanispur, Jammu and Kashmir, etc. His remarkable project, for which Dr. Mani will be remembered for decades and centuries by mankind, especially for Indians, is the excavation of the site Ayodhya. He completed the full and detailed report in record time of 15 days after completion of excavation. This report accepted as a great evidence for Ram Janmabhoomi temple in the court and became a torch bearer to solve the most awaited dispute of India from 5 centuries. Dr. Mani is a member of the various national and international organizations of archaeology and widely traveled to European and Asian countries in international seminars and conferences. He wrote many books and about 190 research papers. He is such a role model and icon for the students of archaeology like me also. Today, he is here with us to provide some insights on the theme Vaishnavism and Shaivism beyond Indus and Oxus. So by not taking much time, I would like to invite respected Dr. Mani to enlighten us on the topic. So you are on air, sir. Please take the charge. Dr. Mani, sir.
Good afternoon, all the distinguished scholars, ladies and gentlemen. At the outset, let me thank Kanya Gurukul campus of Dehradun and Janak Singh Society Bareilly and the organizers involved in organizing this international webinar. I think I must start with my presentation. So as you know, the topic of today's lecture is Vaishnavism and Shaivism beyond Indus and Oxus. You all know very well that this region, which is known as Gandhar, and beyond Gandhar, the region known as Bahlik or Balkh or Bactria, is full of Buddhist antiquities, Buddhist structures, and Buddhism was the predominant religion which was followed in ancient times. But there are evidences also of Vaishnavism and Shaivism, which had reached beyond Indus and Oxus, and which had become at one time very popular religion and popularly depicted in Indian art. From Bodhayan Shraud Sutra itself, we get references of Gandhar, Parashu, that is Persia, and Arat, which is in which may be Ararat in Iraq. So people during the later Vedic times, they were moving. Sometimes in the 2nd millennium BC, we also get evidence of Vedic deities worshipped in Turkey. So it was a very ancient practice. And in the same course, Vaishnavism and Shaivism became popular in Gandhar and Bactria. This is the region, particularly beyond Indus, you can see on the right side, where the Indus River is shown, and above is River Oxus. So along the River Oxus, which meets the Aral Sea, the region, particularly beyond the Oxus, comes under Bahlik or Bactria. The area to the west of Indus is ancient Gandhar, which is mentioned in the Rig Veda in the context of producing quality wool. It is further mentioned in the Atharva Veda, Sutra literature, and many of the Sanskrit and Pali texts of later times. It was one of the 16 great states mentioned in the Anguttara Nikaya. Tradition records that the name of Gandhar was derived from the name of Bruhyu king Gandhar, the son of Angar. The core area of Gandhar seems to be the region with Lamgan and Jalalabad to the west, the hills of Swat and Buner to the north, the Indus to the east, and the hills of Kalabag to the south. Pushkalavati, Charsadda, and Taxila or Takshila were the capitals of Gandhar in its western and eastern parts, respectively. And the names of Pushkalavati and Takshashila are said to have been derived from the names of the two sons of King Bharat, Rama's younger brother, who were given charge of Gandhar region. So Pushkal had made his capital at Pushkalavati or present-day Charsadda, and Takshashila was given to Taksh, who was ruling from Taxila. These were the capitals of Gandhar. Now, Pali literature often mentions Gandhar with Kashmir or Kashmir. Among 16 great states, Gandhar is mentioned with Kamboj and Madra. You can see the pictures of Taxila when it was excavated in early 20th century by Sir John Marshall and his team under Archaeological Survey of India. And you can see the present view of the Bhir Mound, which is the ancientmost mound. All the ruined structures, they are covered now with grass and vegetation. But being a World Heritage Site, some parts of Taxila, like Sirkap, which was the second city of Taxila. You can see both the views soon after excavations on the left side and the present view on the right side. They are representing the second city, which was founded by Indo-Greek and Scythian rulers in the 1st century BC, 2nd century BC time. And the Pakistan government has preserved them because many of the foreign tourists, they go there and visit. Jolyon site in Taxila is also preserved properly. The monastery at Jolyon, constructed during early Kushan period, possibly by Kanishk himself, as believed by Sir John Marshall. The terracotta panel shown here now has been shifted in the Taxila Museum, and it can be identified as a representation of Kanishk with his queen as donors. On the right side of the Buddha figure, you can see a donor with his wife standing, and I have tried to identify them with Kanishk and his consort. And this is based on the iconometry, which is in our traditional Indian literature, gives the figures, main figure or the deity, as double size of the king's figure, and the queen half of the size of king. Other divinities equal to the size of king, because king is Devaputra. So this is as per the Indian iconometry. There are large number of Kushan coins which are found in North India, which are found in the present day Gandhar as well as in the Oxus region. And in these coins, you can very well see on the left side, you can see the figures of Kartikeya, and even the legends are also there, which mention Kartikeya in different forms, Maaseno, Bizago, Skando, like that, in the Bactrian language. In the center and on the right side, you can see the different figures of Shiva on the reverse side of the Kushan kings, whether it is gold or it is copper. Shiva is the most popularly depicted figure on the coins. Sometimes he is standing in front of the Nandi, sometimes standing alone, and he is called in the inscriptions, level inscriptions, as Osho. In recent years, due attention seems to have been given by field archaeologists in Gandhar region in Pakistan in revealing more information from archaeological sites such as Charsadda, Taxila, Shekhan Dheri, Hund, Andan Dheri, Kashmir Smas, Gorkhatri, Manik Rai Dheri, etc. Many archaeological sites have been destroyed by antique hunters, though illegal diggings as reflected in articles and research papers. Many of the sites require still better maintenance. Recent excavations at Saraikhola in Taxila by Abdul Halim and at Charsadda, that is Pushkalavati by Robin Cunningham, take back the antiquity of these traditionally known sites to Neolithic and Gandhar grave cultures in the 3rd and 2nd millennium BC, respectively, which is significant in understanding the relation between tradition and archaeology. There are a few inscriptions which Dr. Naseem Khan from Peshawar University calls them inscribed in Kohi script of Gandhar. They were found first in 1910 by M. Sennard and Thomas Holditch, and then later on more such inscriptions were found in 1999 onwards. And the preliminary results show that the script, although it is not fully deciphered, but the script shows that it has affinity with letters of Brahmi, Kharoshthi, and there are certain letters which are also identical with those pictographs found in the Harappan script. Now, the most important aspect on the Shaivism in Gandhar is the discovery of Kashmir's mast, which can be considered as landmark in the political, cultural, and religious history of Gandharan archaeology. To me, the word Kashmir's mast seems to have derived from Kashmir Mutt, which was the earliest known Shaivite monastic establishment in Gandhar. Kashmir's mast is a great isolated cave, some 1135 meter above the sea level, located 50 kilometers northeast of Mardan in northwest frontier province of Pakistan. The results of recent investigations have been published by Naseem Khan in Treasures from Kashmir's Mast, which was published from Peshawar in 2006. Now, there is a huge establishment or settlement which has also been found down the hill. So on the foothill below the great cave, in the open plain, there is an impressive establishment which is locally known as Bakhai. More sites and water reservoirs are also located in the area in the valley. Xuanzang in the 7th century mentioned the settlement of the area, which is represented besides the Great Cave by Safari, Khar Darwaja, Bade Uba, Bakhai, Dulais Mas, Pajja, and Gaj Dara complexes, which are called today. The establishment continued from 4th to 5th century AD onwards. The Great Cave at Kashmir's mast is mentioned in a copper plate inscription found there during excavation. It is called Sita Mahakandara, where lives goddess Lajja Gauri, who is called as Bhima, who is also mentioned by Xuanzang, who saw her figure in the mountains northeast of Polusha, that is Peshawar, which is the area of present-day Kashmir's mast. Xuanzang also mentions the temple of Maheshwar Dev in the area, which can be identified with the house of the Vardhamaneshwar mentioned in the copper plate inscription. At least 3 monasteries existed at Bakhai settlement. Monastery number 1 is Kshayani Math, mentioned in the copper plate inscription, which was located in the central complex. The second one is Ahani Math, mentioned in a painted water pot inscription, which was located inside the cave. And the third, Para Math, mentioned in the copper plate inscription, which was located to the north of Kshayani Math. So these two, Kshayani Math and Para Math, they were located in the Bakhai area. Besides, remains of 5 Shiva temples have also been found. Based on these, I propose the original name of Kashmir's mast to be Kashmir Math, as it must have been a center of Kashmir Shaivism in the Gandhar area. You can see different deities, which the sculptures of whom depict Vishnu and Shiva, Ganesh, and other deities. They have been all found during the excavations there, and they range from 4th century onwards, continuing up to 10th, 11th century AD. The Kashmir's mast has also unveiled the remains of metal plaques and masks. Radha Krishna in a 9th, 10th century metal copper plaque is depicted very interestingly, and some Kinnari is also depicted, which you can see left on the left side, and Shiva masks are also found on the right side. You can see them. There are a number of inscribed water pots and bronze bowls which have been found in the excavations. The Kashmir's mast has also yielded the bronze seals and ceilings which depict Lajja Gauri, and in the inscription she is called Shri Bhimaya. So on the left side are the actual seals, and on the right side you can see the ceilings and their drawing. There are some more bronze seals and ceilings of Lajja Gauri, and one inscription is there on one ceiling, which depicts the Shivling and human form holding the Shivling, although the inscription is not very well understandable. And on the bronze seal, the goddess Bhima is still mentioned as Shri Bhimaya Guhvasinya. And there is another inscription, Shri Dijirad, which is not very clear. These are some of the copper plates which have been found during the excavations. The Sharda inscription is also found on a chest. In the center, you can see that. And the conch shell or Shankhalipi inscription is also available on schist. Shri Bhima, this is another seal, and one of the sealings has Vividaya. What is the actual meaning of Vividaya is not clear, but a number of seals and sealings mention goddess Bhima. There are a number of gold ornaments which have been found in the excavations there, but amongst the most important objects is the from the Kashmir mosque is a gold seal, which you can see on the left side. It mentions Shri Sita Ram, and in the 3rd, 4th century script with nail-headed Brahmi. This legend perhaps is one of the earliest inscriptions mentioning Sita and Ram together in this gold seal. On the right, you have the sealing made out of this original gold seal. Now, Peshawar, as everyone knows, it was the capital of the Kushans. The present day Bala Hisar fort occupied by the army has great archaeological potential. It is regretted to mention that the famous excavated site, Shah Ji Ki Dheri, just outside the Ganj Gate of Peshawar city, has been today occupied by modern buildings with no remains of Kushan Buddhist settlement. In fact, Kanishka's relic casket, which is now in the Peshawar Museum, it was found from there. But there are sites which have been excavated recently. Amongst them, Gor Khatri is one site in the center of the fortified city. And it has been identified with the site of Stupa of Buddha's alms bowl. But scholars such as Abdur Rahman from Pakistan, they connect it with Gorakhnath, an early medieval Siddha saint. A medieval Shiv temple still exists at this site. These are the views of 1992 excavations which were carried out at Gor Khatri by the Department of Archaeology of Pakistan. The site has yielded a continued cultural sequence from 4th to 3rd century BC till present times. One important aspect is the Indo-Greek coins which depict Krishna and Balram. And on the left side, if you can clearly see the coin, which has its obverse with the legend Basileus Agathocles, and on the right side, the Brahmi legend in the 2nd century BC script, Agathocles is there. On the left side, which is the obverse, you have where the Greek legend is there, you can see the figure of Balram holding the plowshare in his hand and other attributes. And on the right side, you can very well see the figure of Krishna holding the Sudarshan Chakra. Similarly, in Gandhar, in the 4th century AD also, there is one sardonic seal which represents Vishnu and a worshipper. But curiously, the inscription, which is in cursive Bactrian, this reads Mihir Vishnu Shiva. Mihir, as you know, it is Mitra or Surya, Vishnu and Shiv. There are sometimes Shiva depicted in the sculptures in Gandhar region. You can see the Ekmukh Linga. You can see other figures of Shaivite in nature. There are figures of Kartikeya, Vishnu, Surya found from Gandhar, which have the influence of Kashmir, art of Kashmir on them. Interestingly, one at a place near Lamgan in Afghanistan, an inscription was found at Rabatak. And this 23-line inscription is very interesting. It is in the Tokharian or Bactrian language and Greek characters and belongs to the year 1 of Kanishk. And it gives the genealogical list from Kujula Cadphises to Kanishk and gives the connection between the two houses, which normally we had been studying that one house was Cadphises' house and the other house was founded by Kanishk. But this inscription gives the genealogical list which connects both the houses together. It clearly indicates that the new language was adopted for official purpose, which is called Arya Bhasha or Aryu Vaso, as it is written in the Greek script. Though Greek script was initially used as it was common amongst the subjects. In coins also you find that originally the Greek script was in the use, but later on they shifted it. The language was shifted to the Bactrian language. Kanishk is credited to have introduced an era in his year 1 when he already had sway over the northern India. Various cities of the Kshatriyas are mentioned under control of Kanishk, including Saket, Kaushambi, and Patliputra. The names of Ujjain, Kaundinyapur, and Sri Champa have also been deciphered in the inscription as under Kanishka's rule. Now, from Gandhar, we go to Balik or Balkh or Bactria. Antiquity of the Indo-Bactrian relationship starts in the prehistoric times with the evidence of rock art, but can very well be understood with the growth of 16 great states of North India, Northern South Asia, or in other words, the ancient India. Traditionally, Madra, Gandhar, and Kamboj were considered parts of Jambudvip or ancient Indian region, but towards north of it was Balik, which is none other than Balkh or Bactria, but not confined to the northern Afghanistan only and extended in the region of the Oxus-Jaxartes divide, and traditionally called in India in the medieval times as Balkh Bukhara. It covers the area of present-day Uzbekistan and partly Tajikistan, with its neighbors Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan. Interestingly, there is a word called Rishik Tushar, which we get in the Puranic tradition in Matsya Puran, Vayu Puran, and Brahmand Puran, which these Puranas assign 105 or 107 years to the rule of 14 rulers of Rishik Tushar dynasty, who succeeded the Yavanas. Mahabharata also mentions them. Indian literature always refers Kushans as either Tukhar or Tushar or Turushk, as in the Rajtarangini of Kalyan, where 3 names of kings, Hushk, Jushk, and Kanishk are mentioned. The Tokharian or Kushan titles of kings such as Bado Shah or Shahu Nano Shah, they continued amongst the Turks and Mughals in the medieval times as Badshah or Shahanshah. After the downfall of the imperial Kushans, their successors in different parts of Kushan Shahar, Tigin or Napki Malik, around 5th, 6th century, continued to use the title of Kushans, and the later, that is Napki Malik, on his coins called himself to be the king of Tokharians and Persians, Tarkhan, Khorasan, Malka. Now, Indian scripts, Brahmi and Kharoshthi, became popular in this extended region of Bahlik. And when the Kushan Empire was founded, all of these areas were politically and culturally united. This was the time when Indian monks and traders settled in the region between Oxus and Jaxartes, and the evidences from Old Termes, Kara Tepe, Dalvarjin Tepe, and many more archaeological sites in Uzbekistan attest to this. A place in Uzbekistan called Kankini can be identified with Kank, mentioned in the Charak Samhita as the place from where came the Bahlik Bhishaj, or the Bactrian physician Kankayan. So the place is still there in Uzbekistan, known as Kankini. You can see some of the remains which are found in the old or ancient Termes regions. The language used by the Kushans was Bactriano-Pali or corrupt Sanskrit, which was derived from Tokharian and Sanskrit and had become lingua franca of the entire Kushan Empire from Oxus to Ganga. And the Rabatak inscription also mentions that in the first year itself of his reign, Kanishk had discontinued the use of Greek language and adopted Aryo Bhaso, or the Tokharian mixed Bactriano-Pali or Arya Bhasha, as the state language, which had brought the people of Uzbekistan and India nearer to each other about 2000 years ago. There are sites from where Buddhist and Brahmanical remains are found. This is the site of Kampir Tepe, a huge city site. And there are similarities in depiction of terracottas. From Fayaz Tepe, you can see the comparison of the terracottas, which in the 3rd, 4th century AD we get from a site called Ambara in Jammu. There are potsherds with Brahmi and Kharoshthi inscriptions, which are found in the Termes, in Kara Tepe and other sites, which represent the Indian language, Indian script, which was very popular and which was used as lingua franca in the entire region of Bactria. There are manuscripts also which are found. Chronologically, there are 3 phases of Kushan settlements. First, in the region of Tokharistan, north of Bactria and Uzbekistan. Second, in Gandhar, that is south of Bactria and from Kabul to Taxila. And the third in North India. They had their 3 capitals in these 3 spheres or regions. First, in the Surkhandaria region near Termes. Second, at Purushpur or Peshawar, and the third at Mathura. Once the Kushans occupied India, the cultural impacts started in opposite direction. Extension of Indian culture is first visible in Gandhar and then in Bactria. Due to Kushan interactions and carrying forward the Indian culture in the Tarim Basin and around the Gobi Desert, Indian culture, mainly Buddhist, was adopted in the present-day Xinjiang area of China. But Hinduism also flourished there with great reverence, and the deities of Shaivism and Vaishnavism are found over there. In Dunhuang, you can see the figure of Narayan on the left side, the figure of Ganesh with his other kinsmen, the figure of Shiva on the right side at Guangzhou, the figure of Narsingh in stone at Guangzhou. So these figures of Hindu deities continued there to reach to the Tarim Basin through Gandhar and Bactria. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir, for enriching us with your wonderful presentation. This will definitely enlighten all the participants. Now, I would like to invite our chairperson, Professor Hemlata, for her chairperson address. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you very much for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to become the chairperson in these two very impressive sessions. First of all, I would like to thank our Honorable Vice Chancellor, the Registrar Sir, Professor Arora, Professor Nupur, and Renu for having enabled such a beautiful interaction, such informative lectures. I'm totally stunned. I don't know from where to begin. I have pages of notes on all what you have said so long, sir. You have been very, very informative, useful, and enlightened. I'm totally enlightened by the two of you, Professor Anura Manatunga, Director, Center for Heritage Studies, University of Kelaniya, in his lecture on patterns of trafficking of antiquities beyond borders, has alerted us with the various techniques used to smuggle idols across borders. Loss of antiquities is a loss forever. Yes, we agree with you, sir. And it's a most vulnerable crime, this cultural property crime, and how to mitigate the problem. You have told us how antiquities from Southeast Asia, South Asia, African countries are moved to the Western countries from vulnerable countries with political instability and by people who want to become rich overnight, looting, vandalism, and smuggling from harbors. Even though there is the Hague Convention, UNESCO Convention to control all this, still it is continuing. And how all of us, like they say, Aam Aadmi, the common man, and police and customs, as well as school children, should have to unite to stop antiquity trafficking. Thank you very much, Professor Manatunga, for that enlightening lecture. And now I would like to thank Professor B.R. Mani, former Director General and Vice Chancellor, Institute of History of Art, Conservation and Museology, New Delhi, who in his lecture on Vaishnavism and Shaivism beyond Indus and Oxus has exhibited his in-depth knowledge of the topic. The erudite scholar that he has enlightened us with his excellent deliberations, presentation of excavations of archaeological sites, and explained how Buddhism was followed in Gandhar and Bactria, and how later on there are evidences of Vaishnavism and Shaivism in these areas. During later Vedic times, people were moving across boundaries, and there are evidences of Vedic deity worship in Turkey. Gandhar mentioned in Rig and Atharva Veda, Sutra literature, Sanskrit Pali text, and how Pali literature mentions Gandhara along with Kashmir, how there are Kushan coins found in Gandhar and Oxus region having figures of Kartikeya and Shiva, how there are inscriptions in Kohi script of Gandhar, and they have affinity with letters of Brahmi, Kharoshthi, and Harappan scripts. Gandhar's Kashmir Smast derived from Kashmir Mutt. It's a big cave mentioned in a copper plate inscription. Then there is Bakai, an impressive establishment. There are 3 mutts there. There is temple of Maheshwar Dev, similar to Vardhamaneshwar in copper plate inscription. There are remains of 5 Shiva temples along with icons and lingas, metal plaques, masks, bowls, seals with Lajja Gauri, copper plates, inscriptions, gold ornaments, gold seals with mention of Sita Ram. In Peshawar, Gorakhnath and Shiv temples found. Then Indo-Greek coins depict Krishna and Balram. There is Gandhar, where 4th century AD seal with Vishnu worshippers. Shiv in Gandhar art, Ek Mukling, Kartikeya, Vishnu and Surya are depicted. Arya Bhasha being used in Baglan province. Antiquity of Indo-Bactrian relationship has also been clearly explained. Indian scripts of Brahmi and Kharoshthi popular in Baglik are evidence of Indian relations in these places. Occupation of Kushans in India, and they're carrying forward of Indian culture to the areas of Gandhar and Bactria, even up to China. Shaivism and Vaishnavism are represented by figures of Hindu deities. You are simply superb, sir. Thank you very much. You've been very informative and actually added to a great deal of knowledge. We have been very proud as being Shaivites and Vaishnavites. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much. And over to you, Archana.
Thank you, ma'am. We bring today's session to a close. I invite Dr. Himanshu to give the vote of thanks to all guests and attendees. Over to you, Dr. Himanshu.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Archana. Honorable, respected VC sir, Registrar sir, Professor Hemlata ma'am. First of all, it's my privilege to have been asked to propose a vote of thanks for this webinar. I, on behalf of Department of Ancient Indian History, Culture and Archaeology, Kanya Gurukul Campus, Dehradun, and Dr. Janak Singh Socio-Cultural Educational Society, Bareilly, let me call it Fraternity of History, Culture and Archaeology here together. And on my own behalf, extend a very hearty vote of thanks to all the speakers. First of all, I would like to thanks to Chancellor Sir. As we all know that he is a respected member of Parliament and a former state minister too. And he has a very tight schedule. In spite of that, she gave us blessings, his blessings. So thank you very much, Chancellor Sir, for your blessings. I would like to thanks to VC Sir. You are a renowned authority of Vedas and former secretary of Maharishi Sandipni Ved Vidya Pratishthan Ujjain. You always appreciate this type of creative and productive work done by the employees. Thanks a lot, sir, for your blessings. Many thanks to Registrar Sir for your valuable suggestions for this conference. We would like to seek your support in future too. Thank you so much, sir. I thanks Professor UP Arora Sir from the bottom of my heart. There are so many health issues with Professor UP Arora Sir, as Dr. Renu Shukla ma'am said. In spite of that, he gave us time, he gave us so many valuable informations. Perhaps he is the only Indian scholar who has specialized in the Greco-Indian studies. You have been conferred with the second highest civilian award of Greece, the Golden Cross Order of Honor. I hope our collaboration will lead us to greatest height in future. Thanks a lot for being with us, sir. I also wish to express my gratitude to Professor Nipur ma'am, Coordinator KGC Dehradun, for providing us encouragement and support. Thank you, ma'am. Also, I would like to extend my thanks to Professor Hemlata ma'am for giving her valuable time for the program. Thanks a lot, ma'am. I extend really hearty vote of thanks to our keynote speaker, Professor Anura Manatunga sir from Sri Lanka, who spared time from his busiest schedule to grace the occasion. Today, we had an opportunity to hear your thoughts about protecting our precious artifacts from trafficking. Thank you so much, sir. I must mention our deep sense of appreciation for Dr. Mani sir, who provide us a new vision to see Vaishnavism and Shaivism beyond Indus and Oxus. Thanks, sir. Thanks a lot. I would like to thanks to Professor Renu Shukla ma'am, who is really a backbone of this event. These are her irresistible efforts which made this webinar fruitful. As no program can become successful with a single person, so I extend my big thanks to Dr. Archana Dimri and whole crew of our Department of Ancient Indian History and Culture and Archaeology, and of course the team of JSS CES Bareilly. Thanks to all for making the very successful and very great webinar with all your contributions. Thank you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Himanshu. Now we come to the end of this session. Thank you so much, everyone. We will start our new session at 3 p.m. I request you to join at 2:45. See you all in this technical session. Namaskar.